In my last video on brutalism, I talked about a lot of the more theoretical aspects of the style, but I never really touched on the material component of concrete itself. So in this video, I'm going to walk around and show you the kind of physical application of concrete in today's architecture, and then I'll go into Minecraft and show you how to represent that within the game.
It's snowing pretty bad on campus right now, which means I have free reign to walk around and talk to myself. So, you can see here, this wall is made of concrete, and you can't pour a giant pour of concrete that's this wide, and you can in some instances, but you're going to need to have to break it up. And so what they've opted to do here is to chunk up this concrete into these layers. You can see the difference pretty well here, where these lines are just indentations in the formwork. They're not actually separate pours of concrete. But this right here, this joint that's caulked, is an expansion joint. So when the concrete expands and contracts based on the temperature, it gives it some leeway, because if it was just one solid pour of concrete or concrete on concrete, when it expands and contracts, it's going to end up cracking. So that is there to help prevent that. For this wall here, they've caulked all of these joints to kind of disguise what exactly is going on behind it. Sometimes having these very obvious break lines can be a little bit distracting, and it kind of breaks up the pattern. So here, all of these are caulked, and it provides that more uniform running bond pattern. Here we can see how this piece isn't solid, but instead made of these thick concrete slabs that are then arranged into this shape. While here we can see that the formwork used to create these columns was made of two halves that were split down the middle here. You can see it doesn't perfectly line up if you look really closely at it. So when they put it together, tried to line up the ties as close as they could, and then when you break it apart, you have that seam down the middle that you either have to kind of disguise or work into the design as they've done here. Here's a good example of what this looks like without any detailing on it. So you can see here that these semicircular formworks can only get so tall, and so there's another gap where you needed to place the next level of formwork on top. Now these are lined, so it works out really nicely. These are basically unavoidable marks that you're either going to have to sand down or accept and work into your design. Now oftentimes you'll see these little holes. You can see in here what remains of the formwork ties. Again, since concrete is a liquid, you have to create a mold for it to be poured into. And one of the most common ways to do that is through wooden formwork. And so you'll have a front slab of plywood and a back slab of plywood, and you'll tie them together with some metal ties, and then you pour concrete into them. And there's multiple ways you can go about it. Some people choose to cover them up, which I can show you on the back here. So where we won't be seeing it, you can see here that the ties have been covered up. They're not decorated. But over here, where they face people, they're a part of the ornamentation of the wall. And so getting them evenly spaced and spread out within these kind of segments is a nice way to do some detailing that also honors the material itself. Sometimes letting the formwork impress on the concrete itself is a nice move. Since most of them are wood, if you get a nice wood grain texture that you then pour your concrete into, that'll leave its imprint on the concrete itself, leaving to this nice texture on the wall that you really don't have to do much else to. So that's another cool tip that you could use if you're pouring a concrete wall. Oftentimes, very repetitive concrete structures like parking garages will be made of precast concrete parts that are then carried to the site and assembled there. So instead of reading as one solid monolithic block, these read more as an assembled kit of parts.
So in Minecraft, concrete powder is made from sand, gravel, and dye, and then that is combined with water to make solid concrete. And that is relatively accurate to how real concrete is made, with one notable exception. So, in reality, concrete is made up of a mix of rough aggregate, like gravel, a finer aggregate, like sand, and the ratios of these can vary based on how smooth you want the finish of your concrete to be. And then notably, the binding agent, which is cement. Now, you may think that cement and concrete are the same thing, but they're not. That's a common misconception. Cement is it's what makes concrete stick together. It's like the glue that holds it. And this is an important piece of the recipe for concrete that Minecraft doesn't have, for simplicity's sake, primarily. But it's very important nonetheless. And that is combined with water to create liquid concrete. This liquid concrete is often transported in trucks or made on site, and then that is poured out into, let's say, a formwork for a slab, a column, what have you. And the reason these concrete trucks have a spinning drum is to keep the concrete from settling inside, as obviously once it sets, then it will start to harden and form the super strong material that we know it as. And this is really, concrete is used for just about everything nowadays. Like, I don't think you could find a single new construction that doesn't use concrete in some way, shape, or form. Now, concrete is often combined with steel rebar to create reinforced concrete. And one way you can show this, if you're creating a build that is under construction, is to have iron, or I like these waxed exposed copper bars for their color, as it kind of looks like untreated steel, to show that rebar poking out. And if you've ever seen a build that's under construction and it's got these like sticks of rebar poking out, the reason they do this is so when a new layer of concrete is poured on top, you can tie the two pieces of rebar together to connect them, so that way you're not having two, separate pieces that are stacked on one another. They're joined together by that rebar. And then, like I said before, concrete is then poured into often a wooden formwork, and that is held together with these metal formwork ties. And I feel like chains do a pretty good job at representing those. And then I've got stone here to represent the concrete. Then, once the formwork is taken off, you're left with the holes left by these formwork ties. And now, you probably don't want to include these at a smaller scale, but if you're working at a very large scale, this is a nice way to add some texture that really has some meaning behind it. So here, just used stairs, placed them like this, and surrounded them with blocks to create that kind of hole in the concrete. And this by itself looks okay, but then using some light texturing, you can elevate this a little bit more. So basically at the different levels of the formwork, you would have it start off light and then work your way down to a little bit of a darker color. So that way when you stand back and read it, you can see that it reads as concrete that was poured in individual levels that were stacked upon one another, like we saw out in the world. Then if you want to take this a step further and really mark out where those forms were poured and have that kind of like expansion gap that I talked about, you can use layers of stairs, or if you want to do it vertically, walls work too. And that really marks out like, okay, these are separate pieces that all come together to form a whole. And like I was saying about the different impressions left by the formwork, if you pick some gray blocks that have a little bit more texture to them, you can kind of emulate that. So tough, acacia wood, and the new pale oak wood are all great examples where they're all monochrome, but they have more of that rich kind of texture to them. Actually, cobblestone is also a good example. And so it reads like you were impressing into the concrete as it was poured and as it hardened. Then if you want to show just with a column, pretty much the same thing as with the formwork, you just have a small gradient that kind of repeats. And these don't really need to be large and like very drastic in the tone of color, just having like a very visible shift from dark to light and then back to dark and back to light. And repeating that over a small area will help it read as smaller pores of concrete within a larger hole. Then making use of the more polished blocks that have a defined boundary is another good way to, set something aside as like a specially treated pour of concrete. So smooth stone I think is really nice. It could be like a brush texture on a floor, polished andesite, polished tuff, and then blocks with a little more texture could be more of like an imprinted concrete material. And I think the top of lodestones are actually pretty nice. But also this dry or dead brain coral, it really reads like it has a lot of negative space because the darker parts of these indents are at the top, and then it gets lighter at the bottom. So it looks like it's kind of recessed into the block itself. Like you had, some kind of cobblestone texture that you press into the concrete, and then the grooves are kind of what's sticking out here. It's a really nice texture. Well, that'll do it for this video. Let me know in the comments if you enjoyed this style of video where I go out into the world and find real examples to show you, and I can obviously do a lot more of these. And if you enjoyed, be sure to like and subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.